Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. My name is Bowie Madison. I have had type 1 diabetes for 21 years, and I am looking into all factors of not just the disease itself, but also means of healing, the underlying issues causing the things that are causing diabetes, and outlining better management of the condition that we all have, as well as thinking ahead to what a cure looks like and how we can heal as a diabetic collective moving forward. So, today's episode is dedicated to inflammation, the burning, itching, and swelling, whatever inflammation is. No one's quite sure exactly what it is. We may be able to describe it, but then at the same point, if you asked anybody what was going on, nobody could really give you a straight answer as to what was happening. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about inflammation and the beatdown that it's putting on our diabetic bodies. So, like I mentioned, my name's Bowie. I've had type 1 diabetes for 21 years. I have been on a healing journey my entire life, but I've really gotten into the nitty gritty of it and looking to share more information about it in the past 2 years. So, I started a TikTok channel or a TikTok page in October of 2022, and I have just had the best time disseminating information and sharing information with the diabetic collective and learning more about what other diabetics are doing. And it really served as the jump off for this podcast here, talking more about what I discovered were things not a lot of diabetics knew about. So here we go. Talking about inflammation. So the more it's said, the less it's understood. No matter what the condition is, right? And this is something I've mentioned in previous episodes. There are very few diabetics who only have diabetes. And that's to say that it usually comes with another diagnosis, right? Whether it be celiac disease, whether it be Hashimoto's, whether it be Crohn's or IBS, there's usually something else that falls under the autoimmune condition umbrella. And the very nature of autoimmune condition lies in inflammation. And so inflammation, just no matter where you go, everyone's trying, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, we're all trying to address this kind of like baseline, whatever it is you think inflammation is. Everyone seems to be so inflamed, and no one really seems to know what it is that's causing it. So, um, the World Health Organization has stated that chronic inflammatory diseases are the most significant cause of death in the world and pose the greatest threat to the future of human health. So, I mean, the chronic inflammatory disease list is things that we hear about on a daily basis. Things like Alzheimer's, things like heart disease, things like type 2 diabetes. All of these things are on the rise, and the information being applied to treating these conditions just really can't seem to catch up. So, what I wanted to do is dive a little bit uh, further into what's actually going on underneath this inflammation. And it's so wide ranging. So, I just, this little blurb here, from cancer to diabetes, which are, kind of are major conditions, to eczema and asthma, which, again, to those suffering from eczema and asthma, these are not sub disease states, but it's all over. It's affecting our skin. It's affecting our eyes, our mental health, our digestion, organs, tissues, skeleton, everything. Everything seems to be affected by inflammation, and we got to figure out why and how we can improve it. So the first way to address any problem is to actually understand what the problem is. And with inflammation, it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what it is. So I would argue that if you were to ask any doctor or person what inflammation was, you probably wouldn't get the same answer twice. Or if you did, would it describe what inflammation looked like or what it was? And are we making the distinction enough to actually address the issue? So these are some words that get thrown around with inflammation: swollen, inflamed, itchy, blood rushed, angry, irritated. This is describing the tissues that are affected that we are experiencing the downsides of, right? If you're a diabetic, your, for type 2s, your insulin sensitivity is being affected by chronic inflammation of body tissues. All body tissues have receptors for insulin. If you're a type 1 diabetic, your beta cell health has been affected by inflammation. But again, what is inflammation, right? It's not a condition itself, it's a symptom of some condition, whatever that may be. So, what is actually happening? It's kind of like, asking someone to describe the wind or the color red. It's like, well, you're describing things about it, but it's not actually what it is. So, um, let's try and figure that out, because figuring that out opens the door for actually addressing what the issue is. So, if you were to look at, in a medical sense, the term inflammation, it's the body's immune response to an irritant. And again, just so broad, because if you were to ask someone, well, how do I address this irritant? Well, what is the irritant, right? What are we looking to address? Obviously, there are things that are inflammatory, things like, you know, hydrogenated oils, things like sugar, fried food, all of these things. We have kind of very vague and large umbrella groups of things that we identify as inflammatory. But I think most don't understand what it is about those things that bring about the inflammation. So, what are we looking for? Where is this inflammation happening that is causing the downstream conditions? When does it happen? Where did it come from, right? We have to be asking better questions to get to the root of the issue itself. So, what what's actually causing inflammation, right? I eat, you know, I eat fried chicken and a buttered biscuit. I don't feel well afterwards. What's going on? So, looking chemically at the root of the inflammatory cascade in the body's immune response, what you're looking for are reactive oxygen species, or ROS. That's how I'm going to refer to it in the rest of the podcast. So, with these ROS, reactive oxygen species, these are the key signaling molecules in our protective immune cellular cascade that are the signals to our body to protect itself, basically, and are what are causing the symptoms that we associate with inflammation, right? So, if there are ROS present, that's when you're getting the angry, itchy, irritated outcomes that we identify with inflammation. So, an important factor and background to understand in, okay, ROS, where are the ROS coming from? You have to look at the immune response. So, our body has white blood cells. Anytime you hear white blood cell or leukocyte, that is a term for the immune system, right? The white blood cells are what make up our immune system and are part of the immune response. And there are a certain type of white blood cells that are called polymorphonuclear neutrophils. I'm not going to ask anybody else to say that. Polymorphonuclear neutrophils. For the rest of the podcast and for the sake of my speech, I'm just going to call them PMNs. But just know, whenever I use the term PMN, I am referring to these specific white blood cells of the immune response. All right. So these PMNs become activated in states of distress. So, what is a state of distress for the body? It can be physical, like I fall and I scrape my knee and I have physically broken these cells, right? You're bleeding, you've got a scab, what have you. Um, or it can be chemical, right? Or whether you've ingested something that has been incorporated into the cell that alters its stability, has changed something, has brought about something foreign that your body needs to take care of. So when you mention white blood cells, we kind of all have this idea of soldiers, right? These are the warriors protecting the kingdom of our body. So PMNs are the first responder warriors that are identifying threats that may or may not be a threat to the human system. The body really isn't sure, so it sends these first responders to address the situation. And what you'll see is that, we kind of group white blood cell as the soldiers of our immunity, but really the first line of defense is the PMNs, right? Because they are tasked with identifying and taking on, through kind of like absorption, like a macrophage, absorbing and properly disposing of these foreign, quote unquote, invaders. And we'll get to more on what those foreign invaders are later on. So first line of defense, they're targeting the bad stuff, they're swallowing it and getting rid of it. But an important point in terms of its relationship to inflammation is not only is it targeting and getting rid of the thing, it's also signaling repair, right? Because it's been identified as a threat, it's a threat because it's causing damage to the body. The PMN doesn't just like take the the home wrecker and take it out of the house. It's also setting up someone to come back and address what the home wrecker wrecked, right? Because we don't just want holes left where the invader did its job, right? So signaling repair. So the resulting repair function is what we identify as inflammation, right? And we've seen this in the mainstream because for the longest time we were trying to fight inflammation. Everything was inflamed. Fight it, fight it, fight inflammation. When really we don't. Inflammation is a good thing because it's signaling that your body is attempting to take care of itself, right? If you get hurt and it doesn't get inflamed, that means that there wasn't a proper immune response. And that's an important distinction to make. Inflammation is not an enemy. We need to figure out why our immune system is identifying so many things as a threat. Either maybe, we could, two different ways. Either our immune system is overactive and identifying too many things as a threat, or we really are consuming too many threats where our immune system is just getting overtaxed and kind of leaving us looking like Swiss cheese. So I love using the analogy of an inflamed body, as a burning building, right? So whether that be your pancreas for a diabetic, your nerve cells for someone with multiple sclerosis, whatever your inflammation is affecting, that organ, that tissue is a burning building, right? So the PMNs, the white blood cells, are the firefighters on scene putting water on the flames. They are the ones confronting and neutralizing the danger, right? The fire is just tearing our organs to pieces. It's not doing what it's supposed to. It's throwing everything off kilter. PMNs are there to kind of save or to mitigate the damage, right? Now, the inflammation that comes afterwards, right? Kind of like the even if you were to burn your skin, right? It gets scabbed, it gets swollen, it gets filled with like pus and water and kind of all this nasty stuff. That's the cleanup crew, right? So after the fire's been put out, you've got to clean everything up. So you're tarping the house, you're removing the wet drywall, all of the charred furniture, so that you can set the stage for new building material to come in to make the house functional again. So again, inflammation is important because if you just have PMNs taking care of the flames, even if the flames are gone, the house is still a mess, right? So you need inflammation to take care of that. Now, let's take a quick look at where reactive oxygen species, right, which is kind of like what causes inflammation, fits into this. So the full sequence is you have the threat identified, right? The PMNs identify whatever it is as a threat. They absorb and they neutralize. They put the water on the fire, they put the fire out. Where ROS comes in is next. So after the fire's been put out, PMNs leave reactive oxygen species as byproducts, right? As part of the cleanup where damage has occurred, right? So if you're coming in and you look at a burned house, how do you know where the fire is? It's the charred, it's the black, it's the messed up stuff, right? So PMNs leave ROS to make sure that the body knows what needs to be repaired. Now, the body sees the ROS, the reactive oxygen species, and these are molecules that we'll cover later on. And that's its sign to initiate cleanup, right? And the immune system knows that ROS mean cleanup. Why? Because ROS are extremely unstable and reactive. So it knows that it needs to take care of those ROS, otherwise it's going to be a mess, right? And so if you're thinking of this in the context of a house, if you see, wet drywall, wet floorboards and charred stuff, if you don't take care of it, it's going to get moldy, it's going to get mildewy, and it's going to make the house unlivable, right? So it's got to be taken care of right away. And once that kind of ROS reaction has occurred, immune system's like, okay, we've got ROS, time to get in there and clean things up. What's it sending in to clean? Different enzymes, macrophages, which are part of the kind of cleansing immune response, platelets. So again, what are the new building materials? You have to increase blood flow by delivering oxygen, or for delivering oxygen and nutrients for that new tissue, those new cells, minerals, whatever, to help rebuild what has been broken. So an important point to make is that our body is familiar with ROS, right? ROS serve an everyday purpose for our bodies because an inflammatory response is part of a healthy immune system, right? That's kind of how it's regulating itself and making sure that it stays safe. So there are ROS in every cell of the body because ROS are the body's currency for cleaning up. And when we think of inflammation, we think of it happening because of an event, right? Whether it be the scraped knee, I get punched in the jaw, bruised, broken bones, things like that. But in terms of everyday cell processes, it's like taking out the trash, like, right? So you can have like a lot of trash if the house is a mess. But even if you're just like cooking dinner in the kitchen, you're still going to have little bits of trash that are just byproducts of you performing a normal function, right? So ROS is that signal for taking out the trash, independent of this, the amount of trash or the event itself. So the cell needs the trash taken out regularly. It's just a matter of degree. So a healthy adult's reactive oxygen species load signals taking out the trash to maintain a clean and orderly cell. Not a big deal because it's just simple. Okay, making sure things run smoothly, make sure everything's clean, easy, keeping clean house. Now, a chronically inflamed reactive oxygen species load is a hoarder's house with smoke billowing out the windows, right? It's like chaos all the time, and something is clearly not right, right? So, I've got this great visual here. You can be organized with your trash. Having trash is not an issue. That's not the big deal. What turns it into a disease state is the amount and knowing where to put it and having the material to repair everything that's been broken or disposed of, right? And that is where chronic inflammatory conditions become conditions as opposed to just regularly, weekly taking out the trash, so to say. So, for thinking about long term inflammation and that analogy to a hoarder house, what happens if ROS, the signal for cleanup, is always active, right? It's always on. It's not your weekly trash pickup. It's like, oh my God, we've got so much trash today. Oh my God, we've got so much trash today. And just like weeks and weeks of all this trash buildup. What if the body doesn't have enough resources to clean up all of this trash or ROS? And if those ROS stick around and things stay inflamed, what does that say for the quality of the house, right? If you put the fire out and then don't come back to clean things up, that house is going to get moldy. That house is going to get gross. There's holes in the walls. It's just going to be an absolute mess, right? And that is kind of where that chronic inflammatory state comes into play with long-term inflammation and no means of actually fixing the issue. And here with the houses, hurricane aftermath, holes in the roof, always under repair and never truly fixed. That is where our bodies are at. And these anti-inflammatory properties and conditions are really just tarps on the roof because they're addressing the inflammatory response without actually cleaning up and bringing in new building materials. So again, we need to identify just a little bit further what are our ROS? Like, what are they? How do they come up? Where do they come from? How are they disposed of? What do we need to do? So, three molecules in particular make up the majority of reactive oxygen species, and those are a superoxide ion, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxyl radicals. Okay, so you don't need a chemistry degree to really get this. I'm going to break everything down just a little bit more, but so superoxide is a oxygen molecule, O2, with an extra electron, and that extra electron makes it much more reactive. Oxygen itself is already reactive, right? Think oxygen to a flame. It kind of like encourages the burning. Hydrogen peroxide, we're all familiar with that. H2O2. It's the bubbly liquid that you put on wounds to help break things down and heal. Again, that's a literal connection to the healing process. If you need to disinfect and get rid of bad things in an open wound, pouring ROS on this reactive oxygen species, hydrogen peroxide, is a means of getting your immune system active to clean the wound. Okay. So hydrogen peroxide is incredibly reactive. And then hydroxyl radicals are or kind of a result of the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide, which can be reduced by an exchange of molecules and electrons to um, turn into a hydroxy molecule, which is just regular OH minus, but this has an extra electron. That extra electron makes it much more reactive with other substances. Again, a little bit extra, but again, it's important to know these three: superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxyl radicals. So, okay, Bowie, we've gotten into why ROS are important, right? They are important because they signal for repair. If we did not have ROS in our bodies, we would all be dead, right? Because our immune system wouldn't know what needs to be cleaned up and repaired. But when we think of things in the long term, what are the implications and the potentials of these ROS when they've kind of been left to their own devices, right? What's like the mildewy, moldy house after the house fire, right? And it is pretty extensive for humans, right? So signal for repair, that's a good thing. Some of the not so good things: damage of our DNA or RNA, right? So this is at the very base level of the composition of our cells, right? ROS are capable of acting upon DNA structure and altering it, right? This can lead to altering the expression of genes, the order of genes. It again important when you think of a disease state, right? Especially for those type 1 diabetics concerned with genetic expression. And then again, if it's acting on DNA, it's going to act on a lot of other things as well. So ROS can also oxidize polyunsaturated fatty acids and lipids. Like this is like what liver spots are and what white hair comes from, right? So lipid peroxidation or lipofuscin, these are all results of excess ROS, liver spots, white hair. And then the oxidation of amino acids and proteins, right? So, mentioned before about glycating protein receptors, altering protein function. These are all important for diabetics as well. Um, Insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, two sides of the same coin, are reliant on protein receptors on the cell in order to enact what it is that they do. If that receptor becomes glycated, which is a result of chronic inflammation in the presence of ROS, that the shape, the size, the fit of the receptor for insulin changes so that it doesn't bind insulin. That's what insulin resistance is. So not good. Not good to have amino acids oxidized in the presence of excess ROS. And then oxidative deactivation of specific enzymes by oxidation of cofactors. Again, this is kind of an extension of that amino acid and protein function. Essentially, these guys are like Tasmanian devils, just leaving our cells not looking like what they looked like a minute ago before the inflammation got there. So, big point here, and a great thing to remember when you're thinking of oxidative stress. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot too, like an anti-oxidative stress, right? So, oxygen is very reactive, very reactive. Oxidative stress is what is inducing that inflammatory response. So, ROS are what result from things being oxidized in the body, as well as causing more oxidation in the body. So, how does this apply to diabetes? So, how does it not apply to diabetes? So, what in a diabetic is inflamed? It's a multi organ condition, right? the pancreas usually takes the cake because that's kind of like the face of diabetes in terms of its production of insulin and the fact that diabetes is the lack of sensitivity to insulin. But it's not just the beta cells of the pancreas, right? The gut is affected, how we're digesting food, the liver, how that's processing toxins, that can be inflamed, joints, heart, liver, kidney, nephropathy, neuropathy, all of these complications associated with diabetes are because of inflammation, right? So, you know, whatever, whatever, you could say nephropathy or neuropathy, the inflammation of kidney tissue or nerve cells is a result of, let's say, high blood sugar, right? So it's like, oh, if you don't manage your diabetes well, you're making it harder for your kidneys and nerve cells to do their job. But a level deeper than that is because having high blood sugar causes more inflammation that first adversely affects your kidneys and your nerves. So ROS is everywhere. Everywhere that you're experiencing issues with, um, these reactive oxygen species need to be addressed. And then even further, I just made a little side note before on type 1 diabetics interested in the genetic nature of diabetes. So we're concerned on certain immune cells, right? HLA genes, which I talked about in episode 8 of the genetic nature of type 1 diabetes of the same podcast. HLA stands for human leukocyte, right? That's white blood cells. So that's talking about immunity and the fact that those genes very loosely correlate with the diabetic state. But when you look back and think that prolonged ROS exposure can actually alter DNA expression, what's to say that having the genes that are common in diabetics is enough for having diabetes? We've already stated that's not the case. 95% of the people that have the same genes as those that do have diabetes do not. So all of the quote unquote diabetic genes that we think gave us diabetes, for every 5 of us, there's another 95 that have the same ones and don't have diabetes. So might it have been the prolonged exposure to this ROS, this extended unsolved inflammatory response that caused the changes that express this diabetic state? I would argue that it did. So I hope this has helped. I hope this has helped. I mean, what can we do with this now, right? Where do we go? I know that ROS is the issue. It's about managing and understanding what it was that brought about the immune response, right? What is the irritant that is causing our immunity to always be on? And after we identify that, it's going to be a combination of how do you get rid of those threats, as well as how do we supply enough resources and building material to recover from the holes left that our immune system has left, right? So what do we take? What are we eating? What are we eating? It's gonna come down to what we're eating. Our food is our medicine as well as our poison. So what about it is inflammatory? Why is it targeting what it's targeting? And then once we find that out, what are ways that we can minimize exposure and build a defense, right? Because part of one of the biggest parts of healing diabetes is not just regrowing a pancreas. It's going to be getting rid of what took the pancreas away in the first place, right? So it's twofold, two fronts. You've got to identify the threat and remove it, as well as bring in new things to build out new structures, right? Diabetics, we're interested in we think we're interested in rebuilding beta cells, right? Because that's going to help. That's going to, reinstate our insulin supply. For type 2 diabetics, we're looking for new, better receptors for the insulin that we do have circulating, as well as new beta cells, I would argue. So, um, taking things away as well as introducing new things to help reestablish balance. So that is it. Again, a lot of information. Um, I don't want you to think that this is just the end of the road. Like, okay, great, Bowie. I know what inflammation is now. Now what, right? Because again, we still haven't quite identified the irritants. We do have some common irritants that we know about that are bringing about inflammation. Things like those hydrogenated oils, extra sugar, dyes, toxins, heavy metals, things like that. But there's more to it. There's more to it on a systemic level, and we'll cover that in later episodes. In the meantime, I ask that if you are a TikTok user, go ahead and follow me. I cover a lot of this information in shorter form and in a little bit, some more digestible than others, a little bit fun. I like the creative process of creating TikTok. So follow me on TikTok. It's my name, Bowie_Madison. Subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all of the things that I am covering and talking about in diabetic healing. And as we learned today, it goes beyond diabetes, right? This is all inflammatory conditions, all autoimmune conditions need to know about the source of inflammation and how to go about addressing that. We'll talk about that in future episodes. More in terms of what I offer. So, articles, resources, supplement recommendations, all of that is available through my website. That is my name as well, Bowie, Bowie, Madison, Matteson.com. And there you will find all of the things that I have, digital products, ebooks, free resources, websites that I like, articles that I read, and I hope you enjoy. Again, thank you so much for being here. A cure is coming. I know it. We just have to keep asking better questions and taking action and sharing information and experiences. So thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is the end of episode 10. What is inflammation? Thank you so much for being here.